Mike, we all know the dangers of using too many buzzwords, too many industry phrases, and you did something kind of, peculiar. You actually used your own research in order to identify some of those buzzwords and avoid using them. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. And first of all, thanks for having me on. Um, the um, the problem with the buzzwords is even words that you and I probably take for granted. For example, target date funds. A lot of the research shows that participants don't relate to that term. Not only do they not understand it, they just don't relate to it at all. They relate to things more like risk. If you call it target risk, for example, they and these are studies that have been done by putting communications in front of people and asking them what words they preferred and what they liked and what they didn't like. And it's really amazing when you think about it in that context. And you're like, I've been using target date funds all these years, and I never thought about what impact that has on the participant, where the participant just throws up their hands and says, I have no idea what you're talking about, or I don't like what you're talking about. It's kind of like, some words also have a negative conveyance, like annuities. It's the kind of the same thing where uh, I probably know about those negative conveyances because they're pretty well publicized. But for participants, things like target date funds are probably in that same general category. But you and I don't know it because we just throw those terms around. And don't get me started on sequence of returns risk. I can't even go there.
Understood. And more than likely, they're just nodding along, and you think that they're getting it, and they have no idea what you're talking about, but they're too polite to speak up, right?
Absolutely. And that's the thing, is that you lose them. And I always know when they're not getting it, when there's no questions. In front of it, and even in committee, a lot of times when you have no questions, they're not getting it either. And don't assume, by the way, that your plan sponsor is that much more knowledgeable than your participant about those things. Don't throw jargon in front of plan sponsor committees either. It's a bad idea.
I don't want to put you on the spot here, but can you talk? You said target date funds, annuity, obviously. Is there others that you identified and that you replaced?
Um, you may laugh, but retirement.
Really?
Retirement's a bad one. Retirement's often the future for so many folks. Um, they prefer terms like financial independence, financial freedom. Um, and then, obviously there's the whole financial independence, retire early or fire movement. So, I mean, they're looking for that. Okay, retirement's often the distance, but financial independence can happen at any time if I work hard enough at it, if I save hard enough. So that's a retirement was the most shocking one to me. I'm like, I'm a retirement advisor. What do you want me? I'm not a financial independence advisor, but guess what? In 10 years, I'm probably going to be a financial independence advisor, because that's how popular the term is starting to become.
That's great. So, talk about that time that you just knocked it out of the park. As a TAPO, what are you particularly proud of? What is that one time when you really delivered for plan sponsors and plan participants?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of times, because we do have a lot. I've been fortunate enough and blessed to work with a lot of award-winning clients, but I think taking a church plan, and just for those audience who might not be familiar with church plans or denominational church plans, is that they're a lot like MEPS, only they don't have a lot of the infrastructure to back it up, because each church is kind of its own independent, and ministry is kind of their own independent part of the denomination. And a lot of denominations, the denomination doesn't tell them, hey, you have to auto enroll, or if you have to even join the plan. So I think my proudest accomplishment was taking, a smaller church plan, saying, what's preventing us from doing big plan things here? What's preventing us from dramatically cutting our fees, dramatically improving our participation, dramatically growing our assets? And really, at the end of the day, what was preventing us was persistence. It wasn't any rocket science, great, wonderful ideas. In fact, probably our most state of the art idea was sending out email blasts to all the business officials at the churches and ministries, because they were going to be our plan champions, and getting our plan champions to spread the word. That was probably our most revolutionary idea. And as we know, John, that's not an idea that others haven't tried before. But it's persistence. It's really saying, you know what? I'm not going to get caught up in the day-to-day compliance malaise that a lot of plans get caught up in. We're going to be persistent. If at first we don't succeed, try again. We're going to do it until it gets results. And I think a lot of lessons can be learned from even, I mean, I was specific to the church world there, but a lot of plans I think can benefit from advisors being a little more persistent.
Understood. I would assume that referrals and trust would really count for something in church plans.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. That's, if you're looking at in terms of let's just say you're a new advisor. I think churches are a nice place to go. I mean, you could start with, number one, you could start small. You can start at an individual church. They're not all tied to congregations, and then you can work your way up to denominational plans. And not all the denominational plans are large either. This particular one I'm talking about is not a giant plan, but they did things a lot of their giant peers haven't accomplished. So,
understood. Mike, what do you do better than anybody else? And I'm not talking about CAPTRUST. I'm talking about you specifically as a retirement advisor. What sets you apart?
I give great podcast interviews. Is that?
Oh, Dad. Come on, don't go obvious.
I think what really sets me apart as an advisor is my willingness to kind of push through. And what I mean by that is a lot of committees get caught up in what I call committee fatigue. Everything's so overwhelming. I mean, think about the responsibilities, especially in the ERISA world, that plan sponsors have. They have responsibilities to run investments, administration, plan documentation, plan operations. I mean, I've seen when I first arrived at certain clients, they were so caught up in the day-to-day, they just weren't getting anything done. And I think what I like to think I personally bring to the table is to cut through that and say, you know what? I don't care. We got to get all that stuff done, and we've got to move the plan forward. Don't you want to be an award-winning plan? I don't think I've ever said to asked the client if they wanted to be an award-winning plan, and they said no. But they can't get there unless they're able to overcome the traps of the day-to-day. And I think as an advisor, I like to think I've done very well with the plans of which I've worked, of getting past that day-to-day malaise and accomplishing, measurables for a plan so that they can be an award-winning plan someday.
So you're talking about a paralysis of analysis and shaking them out of it, but how do you do that and still remain diplomatic? I mean, it's not a fun thing to do, and you're going to be the bad guy.
Yeah, it's not. It's a fun thing when you get the outcomes. So you got to find an easy one.
There you go.
Every plan that we take over, I look for what I call the quick hitters. What are things that I can quick hit right away that'll immediately show momentum and will immediately have a payoff? I'll give just one example: missing participant. Everybody talks about missing participants. Not a lot of advisors actually do a lot about it. Right. We actually do a lot, and we may say, you know what? I saw one plan I worked with, and I'm telling you the honest truth. There was a plan participant, an active participant in that plan with $1 million account balance that was unlocatable, that the record keeper was telling me was unlocatable. Nonsense. So obviously, that quick hitter for that plan, just finding that person and finding a lot of other large balance people that were supposedly quote unquote lost, was something that got the ball, something that clearly got the ball rolling at that entity.
That's great. So, Webby, we all have heard the great things about being, acquired by an aggregator, if you will. But what I'm looking for really is one of the worst things about being acquired by an aggregator. We're going to go a little contrarian here.
Do you mean from an advisor perspective or a record keeper perspective, or
an advisor,
or any service provider? So, from my perspective,
your perspective.
Well, obviously, the worst thing about being acquired by an aggregator would be to lose your. From my perspective, would be to lose my employment. So,
okay.
I think that's the obvious one. So, besides that, since obviously I haven't lost my employment, I think probably the second worst thing that can happen is you lose your way. And what I mean by that is, you've had a way of doing things. whenever you're going to make new friends when you do an aggregation, that way you can't necessarily say, well, I did this way for 30 years, because I've been doing this for more than 30 years now. I did this way for 30 years, and my way or the highway. And what I see sometimes, I've seen in other I've seen in other aggregations and acquisitions, I've seen advisors kind of say, you know what, instead of learning sometimes there's a potential better way out there, they kind of lose their way. They just like, because nobody wants to hear, if you're the aggregator, like, oh, I'm just going to do it my way, and your way stupid. Yeah, you know? And so I think losing their way is probably close. I mean, obviously close to the not being employed at all, but losing the way is the biggest one. And I think, speaking from my personal experience, it's kind of been, maybe I'm lucky, but it's kind of been the opposite. I've found new ways to derive to add value, and really haven't taken a lot of the old ways away. So it's been kind of a win-win for me. So I think I would always tell people, if you're being acquired, obviously that's always going to be a difficult time because you're worried about your future. But I think it presents tremendous opportunity as well if you're willing to engage it. And I go back to a participant engagement situation in a retirement plan. Here's, if ABC entity acquires me and I'm XYZ, you know what? I've got an opportunity to engage all those folks at ABC. What's stopping me? I'll have, if they're 1,000-person firm, I now have 1,000 potential new LinkedIn friends.
There you
Why
go.
not?
What's stopping me? That's perfect. That's exactly what we needed. Mike Webb, thank you so much for joining us. I do appreciate it.
Thank you, John.